Welcome to Bold Encounters. Does hope really matter in the workplace? Does it have a place in your work life? Well, you might be super successful or you might be on a fast track and you're young, but hope matters. And we have with us Sharon Spano with us today, who is a multi-decade consultant that focuses on just this.
And if you're not happy where you are, figure out what you really want. And it always, to me, goes back to purpose.
I have no idea what to do. He's kind of the extreme example of what I'm trying to help. A young person has no idea what to do in work life.
Technically speaking, a parent isn't supposed to bury their child. That's not the norm. We don't even have a word for that.
Time is life. That's
Mhm.
all she said.
A lot of young people are making really good money, but it just doesn't correlate to the cost of living today.
How are you, Sharon?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me on today.
You bet. I am so impressed with your background. Not only are you a PhD and you founded this company that's been going for decades, helping leaders of all sorts. But I know that you have some interesting things we're going to talk about, some sad, some exciting. I'm really interested in your horse competition and your horse competing for at least 5 minutes at some point. And then I want to hear about your presidential task force and some of your political contacts that are really interesting. But I think I want to start out first. Let's start out with the inciting incident that maybe is of your whole life. You've had something really tough happen to you where you felt stuck. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this very, very difficult moment in your life?
Well, when you and I talked a little bit about it pre-show, I described it, excuse me, as the birth and death of our son, Michael. So our son was born unexpectedly with a rare metabolic disorder, which was quite a journey figuring out what that meant. And, there just wasn't a lot of understanding about it. The name of it is cytochrome C oxidase deficiency. So that's a mouthful in and of itself. And at the time, there were only about three, maybe four neurologists in the entire North American continent that even knew what it was. And I was told at his birth that he would live to be 2 years of age.
Hey, just a few seconds. As a premium member, you make a difference, not just a buck. Now you can give the gift of Bold Encounters Premium to someone else who you think could do the same. It takes just seconds at boldencounters.tv. Think of one person, a founder, a young adult, some person that you've helped mentor, raise, a leader, or even the chief executive. Give them the gift of weekly action plans with experts right by their side. Give them clarity and confidence to remove roadblocks and lead life's work just like you do. Go to boldencounters.tv and give the gift of premium to someone you care about. Thank you for making this all possible, and we'll see you soon.
We got lucky and he lived to the age of 27. But
Mm.
those 2 days, birth and death, it was life changing in many, many ways, but many of them positive, but also, a lot of trauma and drama through those years, as well as we tried so hard to first find cures and then eventually settled into the idea that we had a son with a disability. That changed the trajectory of my career as I went into advocacy and fighting on behalf of children and families. And then he was critical for 4 years. So that was a whole other growth learning opportunity for me to, be as busy as I was in my business, my career, my husband equally so. And then you have, a young man who's, literally in and out of hospitals for 4 years. It was quite a big deal.
Yeah, I would never, we both work with CEOs a lot, and I would never dream of saying that a CEO job is easy. It's incredibly difficult. With
Right.
your mid-sized company, you're a big company, even if you've got everything set up and your systems are amazing, your processes are amazing, you have amazing leaders that are even smarter than you in your 5 or 10 key positions, it's still very all-consuming. How did you do that for 4 years, caregive, and try to be successful at your work? I know that you have some strong feelings about balancing life and work. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, it was challenging, and I will say both my husband and I, blessed to be entrepreneurs, and we had good teams at the time, and we eventually had someone that came in to help us in the home. But I was living in the hospital primarily, in and out, in and out. So you're working with clients in the day. We would trade off. It was kind of like who's got the most important meetings today, and I was speaking a lot at that time. And of course, you don't stop what you're doing because you think tomorrow's going to be better. He's going to be back to normal tomorrow. Obviously, if I'd known it was going to go on 4 years, I probably would have just stopped everything. But to be honest, I'm glad I didn't, because the work was what gave me stability. It made me get out of bed every day and do something meaningful when I was with clients. I'm one that's very trained on being focused in the present. So I was able to be fully present with them. But what I remember most was, just really sheer exhaustion. And you're making choices every day about what you can do and what you can't. The gym was off the table. There was no time or room for that. Those kind of things, those luxury things that we do to keep ourselves fit. For me, when I needed them the most, there was just no time for them. But we managed between the two of us, and then we had one woman that graciously offered to come and stay with him during the day when he wasn't in the hospital. So that freed me up to go in the office and things like that. So it's amazing, how resilient the human spirit is, that you do what you have to do, and more particularly so when it's your own child.
Yeah, it's amazing. I recently had an opportunity or a necessity really to dive deep into the studies of happiness and the ones that we always hear about are and try to dig deeper than what we heard on some TED Talk or some newscast or read in some article. And it's interesting, we've all heard that relationships are very, very important, and yet some of those top two studies have said, just very briefly, because they're just talking about it in brief, obviously, that it's not just marriage and family relationships, it's other types. But in my searches, I found that while that's true, that confidants, so to speak, one or two confidants are essential. If you want to be healthy and you want to be happy, you find a way to get close and loyal to the family members you have, your parents, your siblings, your spouse, your significant other, your children. And people measure Sweden. I lived in Sweden for 2 years, so I was kind of chuckling when they say Sweden's the happiest place on earth. There's,
Mhm.
Scandinavia countries the happiest place. Well, if you dig into those studies, you find in the research that a couple of the really important variables they're piecing together to predict in this, whatever they use, multivariate prediction or whatever. They are including people's attitudes about how well society is doing around them. So it's
Mm.
really a big impact of how the function of society that they see. And one gentleman I knew and another that I used to listen to on a podcast both said the same thing. And they said, I love Sweden. And I did too. I love Sweden. There's nothing against Sweden. I'm just comparing what you went through with what they
Mhm.
said. And they said, it runs almost too good. That's why I like going to the Czech, or I like going to the U.S. Is you have to fight to, in a metaphorical way, life to get somewhere and get some things done and get the things you need to survive. And it's really interesting how important relationships, even the difficult ones, can be in creating long-term fulfillment versus a me, mine, now
Mhm.
excitement, pleasure now, which is addictive and long term doesn't really pay out as much as long term fulfillment and meaning. So, the difficulty with your son, I'm so sorry. I know on the pre call, you said it gave you some amazing lessons. Tell me about some of those big lessons that taught you.
Well, I certainly deepened my spiritual component, the spiritual aspect of my life, because when you're facing the death of a child, it disrupts the family system in a way that nothing else does, and that technically speaking, a parent isn't supposed to bury their child. That's not the norm. We don't even have a word for that.
Mm,
If you bury a spouse, you're a widow or a widower. We don't even have a word for a parent who loses a child, which is awkward. I wish I could invent one, because it creates some awkwardness when you meet people. But
Mm.
but beyond that, so certainly my spiritual development was enhanced a lot. But then because you either heal or die. I mean there's kind of like no other choice. You have those two choices. You're gonna get better and live your life, or you're never gonna be the same again. And you never are the same again, but you can be the best version of yourself given the fact that you've gone through that experience. And so I leaned deeper into my work. I leaned deeper into my faith, but then the work that I do evolved as a result of that because I became more interested in trauma and human development, and that work has really paid off in terms of how I interface with my clients and understanding how people survive trauma, of whatever nature. So I would feel and have to say overall, because how we develop and mature, and I always talk about the 12 stages of human development. The average Americans at stage 5 or 6,
Mm.
how we develop is by making meaning of the things that happen to us in our lives. And most of us can't do that on our own. I mean, you need some external support, and I certainly had that. But it just changed my whole perspective on life, and it certainly gave me more empathy and understanding for people, and whatever they might be going through as well.
Um, let's go right in the middle where you went. There's 12. I know you covered in some of your speaking and your books and articles and such, and certainly your coaching. But get us right to the fifth and give us the context right before that, and maybe the next four that we're not as humans regularly attaining even as adults, and that we should strive for. What are some of those?
Well, it's interesting because we talk about it as it's a hierarchy, but it obviously is not, because what we're really talking about is an expansion of consciousness, awareness, perceptions. It's everything that we are when we talk about the stages. And so the first stages are easy because we all have experienced them. That's like birth to adolescence. Years ago, I'm often heard to say we used to think people didn't develop beyond age 21, but that was based on the structure of the brain, that the executive center of the brain typically we feel is fully developed a little bit earlier in women than men, 21, 22. But that doesn't really hold today because obviously we have a lot more experiences as we grow into life and move through life. So the research now is very clear based on probably 70 plus years of human development research that there are 12 stages as we know of them. And when I say the average American, I think the numbers are somewhere around 68%. They land at what some theorists call the expert and or achiever stage. And they don't necessarily, move beyond that, not because they don't want to, but because they just don't even know there's an opportunity to do that, which is why I'm so passionate about helping people understand that when you hit those adverse moments in life, to really lean into them and ask the question and do the work around what is it that I can learn, how can I make meaning from this situation, because that's where we expand the consciousness and grow up into the later stages. So when you get up into the later stages, let's say 8, 9, 10, at the 10th stage it's like 5% of the population, not a whole lot of people up there. 11 and 12, even fewer. That's where maybe a Gandhi, a Jesus Christ, somebody, if we could test those beings, we would might find them up in those far later stages. And it's not something that we want to necessarily strive for. That's very achiever minded. Like I want to, go up the stages. We like to say that one stage isn't better than the other, but the object is to have the most robust experience of life at whatever stage you're at. The main mark that I want people to understand, and where the word hope comes in, is that again, if you're finding yourself kind of stuck or in that place of emptiness, what I call the emptiness of success, it's often an indicator that you are leaning into a later stage.
That's beautiful. It spurred a thought in me with a client. I don't talk a lot about clients on the show, but I'll give Jeannie and Michael a shout out, my Indianapolis clients. And I was in a session with their whole team. There's like 50, 100 people, I don't know, maybe 200 in front of us. And we're going through a full day session, talking about the important elements of the business strategy and planning and such. And Jamie said something to me. She just sold the business to her son, Michael, and he's doing a terrific job. And she said, in a way, I don't know how to represent the angle, but it just caught me so off guard. It's such an elementary thought. But she said, Mark, time is life. That's
Mm.
all she said. We were talking to
Yeah.
customers. We were saying, okay, we're dissecting the problems they're having and the needs they're having and the fulfillment that we're trying as a whole unit in a cooperative team and set of teams to deliver these ideal outcomes to these specific types of people. And one of them was that we can stop salespeople and some of the customer facing people from wasting so much time because it's such disappointing hard work. And I was querying about time because it sounded so generic and cliche, and she just gave me the right hook and said, Mark, time is your very life.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that's just
here's the
how it
thing.
is.
When I wrote the book on the pursuit of time and money, that was why I wrote it, because I was curious to see how the people who landed in different stages experience time and money. We don't often talk about the two of them together. We talk a lot about them separately. But when you think about it, we make literally dozens of decisions all day long related to, do I have enough time and money? And so, different people at different stages experience time and money differently. So with the way she's talking about it is what we would call very late stage. Most people are chasing time and they're chasing money at that expert and achiever stage of human development. And then as you move into the later stages, you start to value those things in different ways. Now, my money maybe is less about, the right car and all the bows and whistles and the jewelry or whatever. I may still do those things because that's still a part of my enjoyment or whatever. But maybe I'm now more philanthropic. I want to solve world hunger, or like we started a foundation in our son's name, and we raise money every year for people with disabilities, and we support an organization that now serves over 100 people with disabilities. And my vision, the women, the executive director and the team took it way beyond my vision. And we buy vans for people when we can who need an accessible van if they have someone in their life with that's wheelchair bound. So that's more my driver now,
Mm.
is the foundation and funding that. I still do all the stuff. I still got the great car, and I mean, I'm a car person, so I haven't given up my shoes or my cars or my jewelry, but they don't give me the same satisfaction that buying a van for someone in need, because I know that changes their whole life to get an accessible van. That's what really lights us up.
Yeah. And it's almost always not comfortable. And
Yeah.
I don't remember a time when I was celebrating with
Mhm.
euphoria that 10 days later I was seeing my whole life differently. But almost every super difficult thing that you've had to go through educates you on how you should be viewing the time, which is life.
Yeah.
Before we leave the topic of your $7 million Cobra, is that what you have?
No, no, not quite, but I got a great car. I have an AMG, and it's hot. It's a hot car. Yeah, I
Oh,
love it.
good. Well, you could get a Cobra too. You'd look good in a Cobra. So anyway, I want to ask you a really. I read your background, and as I studied you, I said, "Oh, this is the one. This is the person I want to ask this question to." So young people, we both work with CEOs, but we have these young people that are in the workplace. They just started. They just got out of college. Some of them are in jobs that we would never thought of taking after a master's degree or even an undergraduate degree. And they're doing pretty mundane, low level stuff, and they're doing it remotely without much social support. And like you said, not a lot of leadership. But they're really focused on money. They got some student debt. They don't make a lot, uh, versus what some have and some do. And so sometimes when you and I, that aren't 18 anymore, talk about fulfillment and enjoying work, it sounds so out of context. But I think our wisdom is correct I really believe our wisdom is correct in that focusing on the right things can deliver a better paycheck. Maybe not this week, maybe not this quarter, but it can maybe even the next 2 years. Tell me what your thoughts are about that. I'd love you to just dissect all that topic with all of your expertise and tell me how to talk to these young people about that.
I think we're in such an interesting time, Mark, because what I've seen over the last, maybe 15 or more years is that leadership has totally changed. For a while there, I was working with quite a few digital marketers, and these were CEOs who had started up platforms. We've got increasing platforms every day, and they kind of threw the spaghetti up against the wall. They were hoping it would work. They had angel investors, and if it worked, great. They closed it down and started another one. But what was happening during that time frame that was very interesting to me was these guys, men and women, had never been CEOs before, had never even been managers before. Now those people are like maybe in their 40s or whatever. But what was happening was they were bringing in people, let's say they were in their 30s. I'm being stereotypical here, but at that time, and they were bringing in like 20 somethings and just burning them out. So there was a period where all I was hearing was, I don't even hear from my manager. When I do, I'm just told to do the job. I don't even know what the job is. It wasn't like in the day where people rose up through the corporate environment, through the ladder, and you were trained. You got management training, you got leadership training. That wasn't happening. I think it's getting better. It depends on the industry, the segment and whatnot. And I think a lot of young people are making really good money, but it just doesn't correlate to the cost of living today. To your point, I mean, how do you, if you're making 75, even 100,000 a year, I mean, darn condominiums are 1 million anymore in some places. So the whole thing is skewed. And I'm running into people just like you in the younger years that are feeling very lost and overwhelmed. And I think, partly my husband's in the land development business. What he's always saying is why we have all these apartments is the younger generations don't want or can't afford housing. So, we're kind of becoming like Europe now with all these house apartments and condominiums. But to your question, I don't think it's an either or. And I honestly feel like some of these younger generations have already figured that out maybe better than we did. I'm a baby boomer, so we were all about, you got to have it all and you just got to keep working till you get it. I think they're doing a little bit better of a job of balancing it. They're working hard, they're making what they're making, but we talk a lot about how hedonistic they are. And I think there's some truth to that because every generation thinks the generation that comes after is egocentric and hedonistic. But I see them, they're traveling, they're digital nomads.
Yeah.
They're having their kids and they're doing the sprinter. I was just at a sprinter van thing the other day in Colorado. No, in Tahoe is where I was. And I'm watching all these young families because they're doing the digital marketing thing and they're saying we want to be with our kids and we'll make money in a different way because corporate isn't for us. So I think to answer your question, we're at a period in history where there's just so many options. And if you're not happy where you are, figure out what you really want. And it always, to me, goes back to purpose.
Mm.
Doing the work, figure out what is my purpose? What am I passionate about? Where are my strengths? Get those assessments, develop a mission statement, work with the coach, whatever you need to do. Because if you're starting your career, you want to make the best possible choices. But the good news is, again, nothing is wasted. You can pivot in today's market. It's not like the days of my grandmother where you stayed in a company for 40 years or whatever. You don't have to do that anymore. And at the very least, get a mentor, somebody you value and respect that you can, I work with, probably more young people anymore than I do, the 50-year-olds. And it's a joy for me to work with them because they have passion and they, even if they're confused and don't have a purpose, it's really fun to help them figure it out.
Yeah. That's so beautiful. And I want to ask you about your topic of abundance in a second, but I want to just go off of what you just said and ask you one other thing. It seems like to me that if you're a young person and you're trying to figure out what to do, that purpose is said a lot. I have it in my practice, and I actually love the word, love the idea because I've studied it to death and researched it to death. But to say it out loud in a room, it's such a
Mhm.
cliche in a workplace or remote Zoom even. It's such a cliche that the people on the other side understand it as something. And so what is valuable? Well, valuable is making progress and getting that outcome, the specific, precise version that they want. So I'd love you talk a lot about abundance, which means don't just focus on me and the single thing I think, but I'd like you to define it and tell us what your theories and thoughts are on abundance. You talk about it a lot, it looks like.
Well, I talk about radical abundance,
Oh, I
which to
love that.
me, yeah, and I wrote about it in the book, and it's linked to stewardship. And radical abundance to me is having a sense of fulfillment and satisfaction and meaning in life, no matter what your circumstances are.
Mm,
And that's a hard one for people to swallow because I usually get pushback around that. Well, what if they're really poor? What if they can't even make get food on the table, or they have a sick child, or a spouse that's dying? I mean, there's a million different scenarios, but to me it's a spiritual matter. And I think when it first really hit me was I was in Costa Rica some years ago, and I was in an area in the Guanacaste region which was being developed. I mean, they literally had just gotten like cell phone capability like a few years before, and I mean this wasn't that long ago. And it was, I mean, it's the kind of place where tourism is high, but there's cows in the middle of the street kind of thing. And I remember I was there with a friend, and she wanted me to come down with my husband. She was looking at maybe buying a condo down there, and I remember thinking, no, there's no way my husband would want to do that down here, because to me, because of where I come from, the inner city of LA, poverty equates to not being safe. I didn't even realize that till I was down there, and I realized, I don't feel safe here because of the poverty. And then the longer I was there, I realized, no, these people are really happy. They have a very,
pretty
they have a
safe.
very they love their life. They have their beach. It's all about family. I mean, it's not perfect, but I went back actually 2 weeks later with my husband, and he felt the same thing. And we almost built a house there. We didn't, because it's impossible to get title to land there because their systems are just different. But it really hit me that you can be happy in the middle of your life, regardless of the circumstances. And I don't know why I forgot that, because I also came from poverty, and we didn't know we were poor. We just lived our lives. And I had a very happy childhood. I mean, again, it wasn't perfect. My parents were divorced and whatnot, but um, the life wasn't defined by what we had, because we didn't have anything. I mean, literally, like, food was almost a luxury. So radical abundance to me is coming to a place. It's not a place so much to get to, but a place to come from. And when I did the research for the book, what we saw was there was a spectrum from scarcity to abundance. The scarcity and abundance, as I've often heard to say, were very obvious. What was interesting was the moderate scarcity and the moderate abundance, because they looked almost exactly the same in terms of what people were saying and doing. The big difference was people in the moderate scarcity were making fear-based decisions.
Mm,
And I would say a fear-based decision, in my opinion, is not a decision at all, because it's based on emotion. It's rarely based on factual information. So abundant thinkers think more about what they need to create to get the outcomes they want, where scarcity really, again, comes from we don't have enough, and therefore I'm going to make decisions in the negative, most likely, because I'm scared.
create versus take.
Right.
Create create versus protect. Fascinating, interesting.
Well,
Um,
it goes with what you said, because we're going back to the conversation around younger people.
yeah.
That's why I don't think it's either or. I think it's both and. I can be in the chase, but I can define the chase that I'm willing. What's the game I'm really willing to
Mm,
pay, and for what? what is it that I really want? I mean, I had a client years ago that was just literally killing herself and destroying her marriage and her family because she had in her mind that she had to have this $5 million house in California,
Mm.
which made no sense. I mean, she was making really, really good money, digital marketer, and they had a wonderful life. But in her mind, she would only make it if she could buy this extraordinary house. And I thought, and we talked about it a lot, she would not get off of that. What a sad thing. Because when you get that house, then what? Then what? Then what? Um, it was more about the house than the family. And I'm very passionate about helping people understand that you don't have to sacrifice your family for your business or your career.
Yeah. Yes. It's not worth that. It is life, kind of like time. And
Right. We're
um,
building the business for the family. I mean, most of us are building it because, and I run across too many CEOs, and I'm sure you do too, who now, they're coming to me because they have no connection with their own children
yeah,
because they were building the business. So that's great. Now you have all this money and your kids have all these great cars, but they hate you.
yeah. What is that? What is that
Yeah.
result? I ran into someone. I was trying to build something and went to Home Depot, and I saw this guy that was there begging with all the people. He did not look like them. He did not dress like them. He did not hang out with them. He didn't speak to them. He was very odd looking as far as what they all seemed like, and I wondered why he was sitting there begging. And he happened to be on my trajectory to my car, and so I just, I'm not scared of strangers. I just went and asked him, and I obviously introduced myself and was friendly first, and asked him about himself, and then I said, "Can I ask you a personal question?" He said, "Yeah," and I said, Why are you begging here? Like, what led to this?" And there's a lot of people trying to get work in a Home Depot parking lot, a lot
Mhm.
everywhere. And he said, "You know, I just got out of prison. I have no idea what to do." He's kind of the extreme example of what I'm trying to help. A young person that has no idea what to do in work life. And it dawned on me that I don't know if my advice can get anyone money enough to pay the bills in a week, but I know it can in 3 months. And this is the advice that I would give for 3 months. If you can figure out one thing that you're very best at that is valuable to other people, and
Mhm.
find out where you can find those particular types of people as fast and efficient as you can, and you're willing to contact 100 of those strangers every single week, you're going to be okay. And
Mhm.
in your first 5 attempts at trying to talk to them about it, it will be a disaster. You'll go to the library, you'll look up either on ChatGPT or the internet or on Google or wherever. You'll look up how to discover people's needs in that area. You'll discover how to sell something like that to someone in that situation. But it's really the getting up and the willingness to either call, email, walk out on the streets, go to the places where they're found, go to the public areas where it's safe and inappropriate to talk to someone that you don't know. And you make 100 attempts, and that week will be a much better week. It will be the hardest week of your life. But the other thing that's interesting about it is it doesn't take your full day. Anyway, what would your thoughts be for that gentleman who's just got out of prison, sitting at Home Depot? It's a tall order of a piece of advice, but what do you think? Well, how can someone like that have hope?
Well, yeah. Well, my first thought is, how sad is that? That
So
we're
sad.
we're releasing people, but we don't have systems in place to support them when they're out. But given my background and the level of work that I do, and I do a lot of work with genograms and going into the family systems and the history, I would want to know what got him there in the first place, because there's a big chance that he'll go back in without the
Mm,
proper support, and he needs
mm,
to understand how he got in there in the first place. And then from there, you can figure out, because a lot of times when people have had that kind of a life experience, they don't think they deserve anything better. they don't even know what they don't know. That's the tragedy of the environment we're living in today's society, and why we're seeing an increase in crime, and society feeling so disheveled and broken. So I would want him to get an opportunity to see how I got there in the first place. What is the family history? What brought me to this place? And then help him rebuild and begin to dream about what is possible for me. And then again, you start to look at what are the skills and the strengths around that. We tend to focus so much because we're such a therapeutic society, and I believe there is a time and a place for therapy. But rather than get stuck in that cycle of labels of what you're not, let's look
Mm,
at what you are, marry
yes.
that to what you're passionate about, which you probably wouldn't even know at this point, but start to build that dream. And then it's a question of, doing something like you said, finding the right players and who's out there that, I could learn from and mentor from, and begin to rebuild my life and move forward.
Okay, let's shift gears a little bit. I want to ask you about you deal with things that you call human systems in organizations, in small and large companies. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, this was something that I stumbled upon after my son's death, when I was just trying to survive and find a way to heal. Actually, it kind of came to me, and I paid very good attention, very close attention to things that come before me, because often there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
And as I, got deeper and deeper into human development and understanding the dynamics of human systems, because the entire world, as you well know, is made up of systems. I mean, we're a network of systems, everything from the subparticles in our own body to the subparticles in the larger universe. But we don't talk a lot about the human systems because we're so focused, particularly in business, on concrete systems, our marketing systems, our operational systems, our financial systems. And we're all pretty good at that if you're in business, particularly so. But then, in my work, what I started to see was the organization, no matter what organization I went into, it was always dynamics amongst people that was the problem. I mean, that's what I do all day now, is pretty much help leaders figure out how to manage the dynamics of those human systems. And so I got into some work that, there's very solid principles and research, around all of that. And that's a big part of what I teach people, is how to start to look at your world through the systems that you're living in, whether it's personal and professional, because the system never lies.
It seems like to me that human beings have a way of being. Wolves have a way that they typically act, and there's outlier behavior and all that. But human beings also have ways that we, in large part, behave for the most part, and lots of exceptions and variety. And we're known to be flexible in our behavior, but that's one of the things that sets us apart from all the other organisms, and how flexible we are. It's why we are alive with this wimpy skin we have, and no hair, and freeze at the 68 degrees and things like that. I want to ask you, you in part of this organizational behavior and this leadership type work and in study you've done, and its effects you cause. I read you do a lot of family disputations and struggles, and I know that is a very easy thing to fall in if you're working with family. Is that the case?
Well, whenever I work with the leader,
Mm-hmm.
the level and the type of work that I do bleeds into every area of their life, because I've
Mm-hmm.
never believed that we can separate our professional life from our personal life.
Mm-hmm.
You're not a great CEO and then you go home and beat your wife and kick the dog.
Yeah.
You've got to it's got to be integrated. So um, it inevitably, and that's really why I got all the certifications in coaching. I didn't get a PhD to be a coach, but it just happened that in my consulting practice, I was running up against a lot of personal relationship issues and also a lot of past trauma. And I realized, like, I need to know more about how to support my clients, when this stuff comes up. And that was what led to, the deeper work. So I really see all of it. I mean, I hear a lot. I've heard, everything from, incest to, my husband tried to strangle me, and, if someone's got a spouse in prison, I mean, on the outside, that's why I started using the phrase the emptiness of success, because on the outside and on paper, I may look like I've got it all together, but then behind the curtain, there's a lot of things going on. And if we can mitigate that and help that leader step into his highest potential or her highest potential, again, then it ripples through the personal life as well.
Yeah. Well, and when the family members are in one company, which is so frequent, do you deal with a lot of that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You
What is
just
your one piece of advice to those people? There's probably 10 that in various situations, but what, just for time's sake, give us
when
something
the
about that.
family, when the family dynamics are disrupting the
Difficult.
business.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, it's complicated, but you get in and you look at the patterns in that family system, and usually it's not just what's happening in that family system, it's what's happened in the generations before, because one or more of the partners are reliving what they, the energy that they picked up in that earlier generation.
yeah.
Sometimes, I mean, most often it's at a subconscious level. So we got to bring it to awareness so then we can be the change maker and break that cycle. Families have cycles. They have, generations of trauma, generations of drama. You know, you learn it very early, and we carry it into our adulthood and often don't realize it.
Yeah. Perfect. I won't make you do 5 minutes, but I got to hear 30 seconds about horse competition. Tell us quickly before we go into this action plan.
Well, quickly, I moved from California to Florida with a very sick child. My baby was 9 months at the time, and we lived outside of Orlando. And the woman up the street had a horse farm, and I was afraid of horses. And when I think back, I was really trying to overcome fear of losing my son, but I took on the fear of horses first, thank God. And she taught me 100 jumper, and I was, I think, 30 at the time. So I rode competitively till probably 12 years. I rode competitive. I did 100 jumper, and then I did dressage, and it was a great disciplinary effort that carried into my work later when I was traveling all around the country doing consultant work, because you learn the show goes on no matter what the weather, no matter if it's a blizzard, which thank God we don't have those in Florida, but I got stuck in many in the Midwest when I was traveling so much. And those early days of being in horse shows where you rode no matter what, unless it was lightning, paid off in my career down the road.
That's
Still love
terrific.
still love those horses, but I can't do that anymore. I don't have the time. I play
Yeah,
golf now.
I
Yeah.
love horses too. One put me in a creek behind him once, and my wife won't let me live it down. And I'd point out, "You're dang lucky I am not a quadriplegic and or died." Or, I, it was a rough moment, but it was humorous because I was safe, I guess.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right, let's start the premium action plan.
Before we execute our premium action plan, I just want to thank you for fueling this movement on behalf of others. If you haven't yet, give the gift of premium at boldencounters.tv. It's the fastest, easiest gift you'll ever give. And it thrills the people who get it. They too get action plans every single week with experts and their very own breakthroughs. Give the gift of premium to someone you care about. Just go to boldencounters.tv. It takes just seconds. And pass that spark on to someone else. Thank you.